The large-bodied widow was setting loaves on the boarding house porch when the cowboy stopped his wagon at the hitch rail with 2 children sitting silent beside him. The boy held the reins too tightly for a child, and the little girl had one hand pressed to her middle. Martha Bell saw the hollow under their eyes before she saw the dust on their shoes. "Your children look hungry," she said. The cowboy's hand started shaking at the reins. His name was Silas Reed, 35, narrow from hardship, broad through the shoulders, with a brown cattleman's hat held low against the sun, and a bay mare too tired to stamp at flies. He looked at Martha as if she had struck him, then looked down at his hands and closed them around the leather until the shaking hid itself. "They ate yesterday," he said. Martha set one loaf on the porch rail. "That was not what I asked." The boy looked at the bread, the girl looked at Martha. Silas did not look at either child. Martha turned toward the screen door. "Come inside before the flies find the butter. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel." Silas stayed in the yard for 3 breaths longer than pride required. The reins lay across his palms. His children sat beside him, waiting with the stillness children learn when asking has brought them nothing but shame. Martha did not turn back to see whether he followed. She had fed enough men in grief to know that if she watched him too closely, he might choose hunger over being witnessed. The boy climbed down first. He was 9 or near it, all elbows and dust, with a cut at one knee and hair the color of dried wheat. He held out his hand for the girl, and she took it as if it were a rail above deep water. She was 6, maybe 7, with a dress washed thin and one shoe tied with baling twine. Silas stepped down last. His boots hit the dirt without sound. Inside the boarding house kitchen, the heat held close to the stove and the table wore knife scars from 20 years of meals. Martha cut the loaf thick. She was 42, a widow 6 years, soft in the arms, heavy in the hips, strong in the back, with flour on her sleeve and a face the town had learned to underestimate because some people mistake size for softness and softness for weakness. "Sit," she said. Silas remained by the door, the children first. "They will not eat unless you sit," Martha said. The boy looked at his father. Silas removed his hat. Not quickly, not as a show. He took it off the way a man lowers a flag, then set it on the empty chair beside him and sat down. Martha gave the children bread with butter and molasses. She gave them beans from the iron pot, 2 cups of milk, and peach slices she had meant to save for supper. The boy tried to eat slowly. The girl forgot. Molasses shone on her lower lip, and when she saw Martha looking, she lowered her eyes. "No shame in appetite," Martha said. The girl raised her eyes again. "What are your names?" "Nell," the girl said. "Thomas," the boy said, then corrected himself. Tom, Silas, said nothing. His hands rested on either side of the plate she had placed before him. He had not touched the bread. Martha poured coffee and set it near his right hand. "It is not poisoned," she said. His mouth moved once, not quite a smile. "I did not think it was." "You looked at it as if it had a contract hidden under it." Tom stopped chewing. Nell watched her father. Silas lifted the bread, broke it in half, and ate one piece without tasting it. That was when Martha understood that hunger was not the worst thing sitting at her table. Hunger was plain. Men could name it if they had to. Shame was the thing with its hat still in its hands. The boarding house sat at the north end of Mercy Ridge, a town that had 3 streets, 1 church, a livery, a blacksmith shed, a general store, and more opinions than windows. Martha had bought the place after her husband died beneath a collapsed hayloft beam, leaving her with $16, 12 unpaid bills, and a reputation people thought they were kind to pity. At first, no one believed she would keep it. Mrs. Ada Finch from the church said the stairs would be too much for a woman of Martha's size. Mr. Voss at the bank said boarding houses needed discipline. Two widowers hinted marriage would solve her practical concerns and their own laundry. Martha thanked each of them, kept the stairs scrubbed, paid Mr. Voss 3 weeks early, and refused both widowers with the pie cooling in the window between them. By the 6th year, the Bell boarding house was not grand, but it was known. Railroad men slept there when the line washed out. Drovers paid for breakfast before market. Teachers took the front room in term. Women traveling alone asked for Martha by name, though they did not always say why. Martha kept 3 rules. No man drunk past the front parlor. No child turned from the kitchen hungry. No guest asked more questions than safety required. Silas Reed would have broken none of them. Still, he looked like a man ready to apologize for needing a chair. After the children ate, Nell fell asleep with her head on her folded arms. Tom sat upright and fought his own eyes. Silas took 1 cup of coffee, 1 slice of bread, and half the beans, leaving the rest as if somebody might charge him for finishing. Martha took his plate and filled it again. I did not ask for more. I did not hear you refuse it. He looked at her then. His eyes were gray, set deep, and tired in a way sleep would not fix. I can pay when I sell the mare. You will not sell that mare today. She is all I have worth anything. That is why you will not sell her today. The quiet after that was not easy, but it was honest. He turned the coffee cup once by the handle. Martha had seen men lie in many ways. Silas did not lie. He withheld, which was different and harder to move. You need a room? She asked. He shook his head. Need work. Work first, then room? Work first, if there is enough. Martha leaned back against the sink. Fence behind the wash house is down. Pantry shelves are sagging. East gutter dropped in last week's rain. Woodpile needs cutting before Sunday dinner. I pay fare and feed those who work under my roof. He looked toward the sleeping children. And them, they eat whether you fix the fence straight or crooked. His hand tightened on the cup. That is poor bargaining. No, Martha said. It is supper. By late afternoon, Silas had taken the broken fence behind the wash house apart board by board, stacked what could be saved and set aside what could not. He worked without hurry and without waste. Tom carried nails in a tin cup. Nell sat in the shade with a biscuit in both hands and watched as if work itself were a language she was trying to remember. Martha came out with lemonade. Tom straightened fast. I can work. I see that. I am not taking charity. Martha looked at the cup of nails in his hand. No, you are taking direction poorly, but that can be repaired. Silas glanced over. This time the corner of his mouth did move. Tom looked uncertain. It means drink, Martha said. The boy drank. The fence stood by sundown. Not pretty. Strong, Silas had used the soundboards, cut 2 new braces from scrap, and set the gate so it no longer dragged through the dirt. Martha tested the latch twice. It caught clean both times. You know your work, she said. I used to. That kind does not leave a man. He wiped dust from his wrists. Some things do. She did not ask what. The children were listening. Martha gave them the small back room off the kitchen that night, the one meant for hired help when the house was full. It held 2 narrow beds, 1 washstand, and a window facing the herb patch. Silas stood in the doorway with his hat in his hand. I said work first. You worked, not a room's worth. I decide what a room is worth in my house. Nell had already sat on the bed nearest the wall and placed her hand on the quilt as if asking permission from the cloth. Tom stood beside her, trying to look older than hunger. Silas looked at the two beds, then back at Martha. "I will sleep in the wagon." No, the word landed flat enough that even the children looked up. Silas's jaw shifted. "Mrs. Bell, there is a floor if you cannot bring yourself to take a bed. But you will not sleep in a wagon in my yard while your children wonder whether they drove you there." He looked down. Martha took a folded blanket from the shelf and handed it to him. His fingers brushed hers. His hand was rough and cold from the pump water. It shook once, barely. "I'm not used to being told kindly," he said. "Then you can practice." The next morning began before the sun cleared the livery roof. Martha found Silas at the pump, washing his shirt in cold water, bare forearms corded with work and his hat hanging from the handle. Tom slept with one arm flung over his head. Nell slept curled around the corner of the quilt. Martha set coffee on the back step. "You start too early," she said. He wrung the shirt. "Children wake hungry. They wake fed today." He did not answer. She looked toward the fence. "Pantry shelves after breakfast. You trust me in your pantry? I trust shelves more than I trust appearances." He looked at her then, and something passed across his face too quickly to hold. Not gratitude. Gratitude was easier. This was the first small shock of being measured by use instead of rumor. For 3 days the arrangement remained practical. Silas repaired shelves, cut wood, patched the gutter, and tightened the loose rail on the stair. Martha fed him and the children and wrote his hours in the kitchen ledger. She did not mark meals against his pay. When he saw that, he tapped the page once. "You forgot 3 suppers. No, board should come off wages. Not for children. For me. You work better fed." He looked ready to argue, then closed the ledger and slid it back toward her. "Yes, ma'am. Do not ma'am me in my own kitchen. It makes me feel like a courthouse." "Yes, Mrs. Bell, that is not better." Nell giggled into her cup. It was the first sound Martha had heard from her that did not seem afraid of being noticed. By the end of the week, the back room had changed by inches. Tom's cup sat on the lower shelf without being told. Nell's hair ribbon, washed and drying, hung from the bedpost. Silas's hat moved from the floor beside his bed to the peg near the door. Not all at once. A man like Silas did not move into a place. He stopped retreating from it. Martha noticed and said nothing. On Saturday, the town noticed him. Martha went to Deller's General for flour, coffee, lamp oil, and dried apples. Silas walked behind her with a crate balanced on one shoulder, while Tom held Nell's hand near the candy jars. The bell over the store door rang. Conversation thinned the way it does when people pretend they were already finished speaking. Ada Finch stood by the counter, black bonnet strings tied hard beneath her chin, her basket empty except for thread and judgment. "Well," Ada said, "Mrs. Bell has hired a family now." Martha set the flour order on the counter. Mr. Deller kept his eyes on the scale. Ada looked at Silas, then at the children. A woman alone must be careful what she brings under her roof, especially a woman with property, especially when the man has children and no wife to speak for him. Silas did not move. Tom's hand tightened around Nell's. Martha turned. "If you have a concern, Mrs. Finch, give it a clean name." Ada blinked. "I only mean charity can invite misunderstanding. Then do not misunderstand it." The store held its breath. Ada's mouth tightened. "Some of us remember your husband. He would not have liked strangers sleeping beside the kitchen." Martha's face did not change. "My husband is in the churchyard. He has had 6 years to object. Mr. Deller coughed once into his sleeve. Silas lowered the crate from his shoulder and set it gently on the floor, as if he did not trust his hands with weight just then. Martha paid for the goods and lifted the smaller parcel herself. Silas reached for it. "I have this," she said. He looked at her hand on the parcel, then at her face, and nodded. It was not refusal, it was respect. Outside, Tom spoke before any adult could. "Mrs. Finch talks like a crow. Crows are useful," Martha said. Nell looked up. "What is she?" Martha considered. "A locked drawer with nothing in it." Silas looked away toward the hitch rail. His shoulders moved once, almost a laugh, and the children saw it. That mattered more than the joke. The days warmed. Dust rose off the road and settled in the porch cracks. Guests came and went. Silas became the man who fixed what broke before Martha had to ask twice. He mended the chicken gate, sharpened the kitchen knives, reset the loose step by the front porch, and built a narrow shelf under the window where Nell could place 3 smooth stones she carried in her apron pocket. Martha learned the shape of their days. Tom woke ready to prove his keep. Nell woke quiet and watched the kitchen until she knew which way the morning leaned. Silas woke as if braced for bad news. The first thing he did was count the children with his eyes. Only after that did he drink coffee. One morning, Martha caught him doing it. "They are here," she said. He held the cup near his mouth and did not drink. "I know. Knowing and believing are not always the same." His eyes stayed on the doorway where Nell had just passed with a basin. No, she let the silence stand. He did not owe her the story yet. But stories have a way of entering a house through small chores. A name on a paper. A child's fear of rain. A man who could sleep only with his boots placed toward the door. The story came in pieces. His wife had been called Mary. Fever took her after a spring flood, not all at once, but in 5 days it emptied the House of Sound. There had been a ranch job west of Mercy Ridge and a foreman who said children slowed men down, and a bunkhouse where no decent father could keep a daughter. Silas sold his saddle, then his second horse, then the brass watch his father had carried, trying to hold the children near work. When the job ended, he loaded what remained into the wagon and drove until the mare leaned in the traces. He did not tell it as sorrow. He told it while planing a board for the pantry. Mary's name came once, then the plane moved again. Martha was kneading dough at the table. Flour covered her hands. She did not stop. "She must have trusted you," she said. The plane stopped. He looked at the board. She had no one else. That is not the same. His throat worked once. No, Nell came in with eggs in her apron, and the moment closed like a hand around a match flame. In the 3rd week, Tom called Martha ma'am and then caught himself. "Mrs. Bell," he corrected. Martha looked up from the stove. "You are allowed to call me Martha when you are not standing in church or lying to avoid trouble." Tom considered. "I do not lie much. Then you will not wear the name out." He nodded, solemn as a judge. That evening he said Martha once while asking where to put kindling. Nell heard it and tried the name under her breath, soft enough that only the stove might have answered. Silas heard too. He stood by the door with a bucket in hand and looked at Martha as if waiting to see whether she would take offense. She did not. "Woodbox," she said to Tom. The boy carried the kindling over. Silas set the bucket down by the sink. The sound was gentle. A man setting down fear, one small object at a time. Mercy Ridge kept watching. Ada Finch watched from the church steps. Mr. Voss watched from the bank window. Two drovers at the livery watched Silas carry flour into Martha's back door and spoke low enough to show they knew they should not speak at all. Martha ignored most of it. She had been watched for her body, for her widowhood, for her appetite, for her laugh, for the way she took up a chair without apologizing. A town's gaze could tire a woman, but it did not have to guide her. Silas was less practiced. After one supper, he remained in the kitchen while the children washed tin plates at the basin. "I can move us to the livery loft." Martha looked at him over a stack of folded napkins. "Can you? I can ask. That was not what I asked." His mouth closed. Nell turned from the basin. "I do not like hay beds." Tom elbowed her lightly. She lifted her chin. "I do not." Silas looked at his daughter, then at Martha. "There," Martha said, "your household is spoken. My household is 6 and 9. Then it is old enough to know hay from a mattress." Tom lowered his head to hide his smile. Silas leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. He looked too tired to stand and too stubborn to sit. "Why?" he asked. Martha folded one napkin, then another. "Why what? Why keep doing this?" She placed the napkins in a neat stack. "Because your children looked hungry. That was 3 weeks ago." Children can look hungry in more than one way. The basin water stilled. Nell's hand stopped in it. Tom looked at the floor. Silas did not answer. That was the first night he left his hat on the peg in the kitchen instead of carrying it to the back room. On a Monday near the end of June, a man named Hollis Crane came into town on a black horse with a silver-mounted bridle and a voice made for counters. He had been the foreman at the ranch west of Mercy Ridge. Silas saw him first from the boarding-house porch and went still with a hammer in his hand. Martha was hanging sheets on the line. "Who is he?" Silas set the hammer down. "Trouble with clean boots." Hollis did not come to the boarding-house at once. He went to the livery, then Deller's, then the bank. By noon, everyone had seen him. By 1, Ada Finch knew his business before he stated it, which meant she was nearly floating with purpose when she followed him into Deller's General and found Martha buying sugar. Hollis removed his hat for Martha. He did not remove it for kindness. He removed it because some men know the shape of manners and use it like a hook. "Mrs. Bell," Martha set the sugar sack on the counter. "Mr. Crane, you know me? I know enough from the way Mr. Reed's hand left the hammer." Ada made a small sound. Mr. Deller found sudden interest in a barrel of beans. Hollis smiled. "Then you know he left owing wages advanced against work." Silas entered behind him. Tom and Nell were not there. Martha thanked Providence for that and showed none of it. Silas spoke from the doorway. "I worked out what I owed." Hollis turned. "You left before the season closed. You told me my daughter could sleep in the tack room or not sleep on your place at all. I told you the ranch was not a nursery. The store went quiet in the old way, the hungry way, waiting to see who would bleed and who would be able to say they had warned him." Hollis held out a folded paper. "Debt is debt." Silas looked at the paper. His face had emptied. "How much?" Martha asked. Hollis looked pleased. $28.50. Silas said, "Do not." Martha did not look at him. She reached into her market purse and removed the money she had brought for winter flour. $28.50, nearly all of it. She counted it onto Mr. Deller's counter, coin by coin, bill by bill. Hollis's smile faded a little. "That settles Reed's account." "No," Martha said. "It purchases your silence on it." He blinked. She slid the money forward. "If you speak his debt in this town again, I will tell every woman from here to the county seat that you put a motherless girl in a tack room and called it order." Ada Finch drew in a breath. Hollis looked at Silas, perhaps expecting him to stop her. Silas said one flat line, "Take the money and ride." Hollis took it. Men like him often do. After he left, the bell over the store door trembled in the frame. Martha picked up her sugar sack. Her purse was nearly empty. Her face gave away nothing. Silas stepped aside so she could pass. Outside he said, "You should not have paid that." "No, then why? Because he came for your children, whether he said so or not." His hands started shaking again. This time there were no reins to hide it. Martha set the sugar down on the boardwalk. Silas, he stared at his hands as if they belonged to another man. "I hate that they saw me hungry," he said. "They saw you stay." He closed his hand slowly. "I do not know how to repay you." Start by not confusing repayment with worth. He looked at her then, and whatever answer he had prepared was gone. That night, the kitchen held a different quiet. Tom and Nell knew something had happened because children always know when adult air changes. Martha stirred stew. Silas sat at the table with his hat between his hands. Tom asked, "Are we leaving?" Silas's head came up. "No." Nell's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "You promise?" Silas looked at Martha, then back to his daughter. "I promise for tonight." Nell considered that. "Tomorrow too?" Martha set the stew pot on the table. "Tomorrow is wash day. Anyone leaving before wash day is a coward." Tom nodded as if this were established law. Silas let out a breath that was almost pain and almost laughter. He covered his eyes with one hand for a moment. Martha turned away to fetch bowls, giving him the privacy of her back. By July, the town had chosen sides without admitting there were sides. Mrs. Finch spoke of impropriety more softly than before, because Martha's words about Hollis Crane had traveled faster than judgment. Mr. Deller began setting aside broken crates for Silas to use as kindling. The church ladies sent over too many mending jobs, each one with payment already pinned inside. Mr. Voss stopped watching from the bank window when Martha passed. The children changed in the way watered things change. Tom's shoulders lowered. Nell ran once across the yard and then seemed startled by her own speed. She began following Martha through the kitchen, asking the names of spices and the difference between simmer and boil. "Simmer is when the pot is thinking," Martha said. "What is boil?" "When it is decided too loudly." Nell repeated this to Silas at supper. He looked at Martha over the table. "That sounds like a person I know." Then pity them. The children laughed. Silas smiled into his cup. His coffee cup had moved over the weeks from the far end of the table to the near end, not by announcement, only by use. One evening after the guests had gone upstairs, Martha found him in the parlor looking at the photograph on the mantel. It showed her husband, Amos Bell, standing stiff beside a younger Martha who had not yet learned how many ways loneliness could enter a marriage even before death did. Silas did not touch the frame. He was a good man. Martha wiped the already clean sideboard. He was not a cruel one. That is not the same. No, Silas waited. Martha folded the cloth once. He liked me best when I was useful and least when I needed anything. Some days that felt like love. Some days it felt like employment without wages. Silas looked at the photograph. Mary was good, he said. Martha stayed still. She deserved a better ending than fever and a dirt floor. Yes, I keep thinking if I had gotten her to town sooner, would she have lived? He did not answer. Martha set the cloth down. You know the truth and still punish yourself with the question. He looked at her then. You talk plain. I am too fat for dancing around most things. His face changed. Not pity, not correction, something sterner. Do not use their word as if it belongs to them. Martha felt the room go quiet around her. Silas lifted his hat from the chair and held it at his side. You are the woman who fed my children before you knew my name. She could have answered lightly. She had practice in that. Instead, she stood with both hands on the chair back and let the words find the place they were meant to find. Good night, Silas. Good night, Martha. The proposal did not come in the parlor. It did not come under moonlight or after music. It came 3 weeks later, in the kitchen, with rain ticking at the windows from a late summer storm, and Nell asleep on 2 chairs with a shawl over her legs. Silas had been asked to take permanent work at the livery. He could afford a rented room by September. He told Martha this while fixing the loose handle on the flour bin. That is good, she said. Yes, the handle turned once under his hand. He tightened the screw too far, loosened it, and tried again. Tom will miss the wood box, she said. He can visit it. Nell will miss the spice shelf. She can visit that too. Silas set the screwdriver down. Martha, she looked up from the dough. I can take the livery room, I know. I can pay you what I owe. You do not owe what you think you owe. I know that too. Rain tapped the glass. Upstairs, a board creaked under a guest's foot. Nell stirred but did not wake. Silas took off his hat, though he was indoors and had already removed it at supper. He held it because his hands needed something honest. I am not asking because I need a roof. Martha's hand stilled in the dough. I am asking because when I think of a roof now, it has your kitchen under it. She did not speak. He went on, each word plain and short. I have 2 children. I have little money. I have grief that still takes up a chair some nights. I am not bringing you ease. But I would bring you my name if you wanted it, or take yours if that suits better. I would stand beside this house and not in front of it. Martha looked at him for a long time. Nell slept. The rain kept time. The dough held the shape of Martha's hands. You would take mine? If you offered it. Men talk large when rain makes them brave. I can ask again in the heat tomorrow. Martha looked toward the back room where Tom slept, then at Nell curled beneath the shawl, then at the man standing with his hat in his hands and no defense left but truth. I will not become smaller to fit a marriage. No, I will not be grateful for being chosen. No, this house stays mine. Yes, and the children? His voice changed. They are not a bargain. No, Martha said. They are the question. He waited. She wiped flour from her hands and walked to Nell. The girl slept with one hand open, palm up. Martha tucked the shawl closer around her legs. Nell did not wake, but her fingers closed around the edge of Martha's sleeve. Martha stood there until the rain softened. Then she turned back. Ask again tomorrow in the heat. Silas nodded once. I will. He did. At noon, with the yard bright and dust already drying at the fence line, he stood by the pump with Tom pretending not to listen from the woodpile and Nell openly listening from the porch step. Martha Bell, he said, hat in hand, will you marry me and let me keep learning how to stay? Martha looked at the children. Tom stared at the wood in his arms. Nell held both hands against her mouth. Martha looked back at Silas. Yes, she said, but you are not moving the spice shelf. Nell ran first, not to Silas, to Martha. She wrapped both arms around Martha's waist as far as they would go and pressed her face into her apron. Tom came slower because boys of 9 have pride to carry. But he leaned into Silas's side and stayed there. Silas did not touch Martha yet. He waited until she looked at him. Then he set his hat on the porch rail and took her hand in both of his. His hands shook. This time, nobody looked away. They married in September beneath cottonwoods turning gold at the tips. Martha wore blue because white had never done much for practical women. Silas wore a dark coat borrowed from Mr. Deller and boots polished by Tom until the boy could see his nose in them. Nell carried a small basket of late sunflowers and dropped petals in a line too careful to be scattered. Ada Finch came. Of course she came. She sat in the second row with her chin high and cried once when Nell took Martha's hand during the vows. Later, at the supper table, Ada said the chicken was tender. Martha said, "Thank you." That was all. Some victories do not need witness beaten into confession. The boarding house changed again after that, not into a different house, but into one that had accepted more footsteps. Silas built a second pantry shelf and never said it was for Nell's spice jars, though it was. Tom took over kindling and grew proud of straight stacks. Nell learned biscuits, then gravy, then the patience of pie crust. Guests still came. Men still tried to talk too much in the parlor. Martha still turned them out when needed. Silas stood beside the house and not in front of it. On cool nights after hot days, when the supper dishes were washed and the last guest had climbed the stairs, Martha and Silas sat on the porch with coffee between them. His cup rested close to hers now. The bay mare shifted in the pen. Cottonwood leaves moved dark against a violet and gold sky. One evening Nell came to the door in her nightdress. "Martha, yes, I am not hungry." Martha looked at Silas. He looked down at his hands. They were steady. "No," Martha said, "you are not." Nell nodded, satisfied, and went back inside.